Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our second annual Mindfulness Matters series, where we'll be discussing HIV education and the mental health impact of African American women. Because, sisters, we need to know the power of information saves Black lives. Everybody, my name is Dr. Kadrea Derrick. I am a board certified anesthesiologist and currently serve as the Health and Human Services Chair of the Greater Pearland Area chapter of the Links Incorporated. The Links Incorporated is an international nonprofit corporation that was established in 1946 and is one of the nation's oldest and largest volunteer service organizations full of extraordinary women. We are committed to enriching, sustaining, and ensuring culture and economic survival of African Americans and persons of African ancestry, and to making a difference in our communities and the world. We are business and civic leaders, role models, mentors, activists, and volunteers who work towards a common vision by engaging like minded organizations and individuals for partnership. We are so honored and excited to have developed a partnership with AIDS Foundation Houston over the past 2 years. Tonight, we will be engaging in riveting educational webinar series surrounding an ever evolving conversation of HIV and mental health in our community. I have the distinguished honor to introduce you all to the president of the Greater Pearland Area chapter of the Links Incorporated, Dr. Antrice Baget.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for that introduction, Dr. Derrick. And yes, I am Dr. Antrice Baget, the president of the Greater Pearland Area, Texas chapter of the Links. And as you stated, we are phenomenal women, and our core values tell everyone who we are. And those values are friendship, integrity, honesty, service, servant leadership, family relationships, courage, respect for self, legacy, confidentiality, responsibility, as well as accountability. And so, as we have this powerful conversation this evening, I want everyone to know that our chapter, the Greater Pearland Area chapter of the Links, we were chartered in June of 2014, and our membership consists of 40 dynamic African American professional women whose careers spanned healthcare, STEM, education. We have entrepreneurs, artists. We even have people in the legal arena. So when you say boss women, you're talking about the Greater Pearland Area chapter of the Links. Um, but this evening's virtual event highlights, as you stated, Dr. Derrick, our partnership with AIDS Foundation Houston. And of course, as you also said, this is our second year collaborating with them. Tonight's forum, HIV education and the mental health impact of African American women. Sisters, we need to know the power of information that saves Black lives. It's really important at this time, at this moment. Um, so, what I'm going to do is I'm going to attempt to introduce our amazing moderator, Mr. Jeffrey Campbell. Mr. Campbell is a graduate of Texas State University. He's a very humble man. He asked me not to tell everybody all these accolades, but I'm going to do it anyway. He is currently the Chief Health Officer for AIDS Foundation Houston. Um, he's very intentional about creating safe physical and virtual spaces for conversations that explore healthy conversations about sex, sexuality, orientation, and gender expression. And so, as we know, at this time, in this country, in this world, this is very important. Mr. Campbell is also an ordained minister. And what's most respectful is that he has spent the last years working to empower Black church leaders on having these types of conversations. So I want to thank you for doing that, because a lot of times our leaders, when we go to our leaders, they don't understand the magnitude of the weight that we carry. So with that being said, thank you. Thank you for everything that you are doing. Thank you for creating safe spaces for marginalized people to heal and to be empowered. And so with that being said, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Bajay. Thank you, Dr. Derek, and thank you to the ladies of the Greater Pearland Area chapter of the Links Incorporated. It is indeed my pleasure to have this opportunity to be with you all again this year as we approach World AIDS Day. I am the Chief Health Officer at AIDS Foundation Houston, or AFH, as I probably will say most of the evening. We are a 40-year-old organization. We're actually celebrating our 40th year this year. We are the oldest HIV prevention service organization in the state of Texas. And we do a myriad of things to prevent HIV, as well as to attend to the needs of those who are living with HIV. It is very important work, and I am glad to be and proud to be a part of the AFH team. I want to take this opportunity now just to honor you, all of these Black women that I am in this space with on this evening, because when I look back over my journey, Black women show up in every space. From birth to now, Black women who have empowered me, encouraged me, taken care of me, and nurtured me all along the way. So I am at home in this space with you all this evening, and I respect and appreciate the opportunity to be with you. And so now, as we move on, I want to introduce one of our panel members. And I'm happy to say, first and foremost, that she is one of the board members at AFH in the person of Dr. Raquel Bill Wilkins. Dr. Bill Wilkins is, she completed her medical school education and psychiatry residency at Baylor College of Medicine. She served 6 years in the HIV community here in Houston at Harris Health's Thomas Street Health Center, which is the nation's first freestanding HIV clinic. This experience, as she has written, has taught her a wealth of knowledge about social and emotional impacts that HIV has had and continues to have on us as a community of people. She's gained clinical wisdom as well as social wisdom in the work that she's done. And she's shown up in 2 critical publications in reviewed HIV journals, specifically Fundamentals of HIV Medicine in 2019 and the Subspecialty Care of HIV-Infected Patients in 2018. So I'm excited to introduce our first panelist this evening, Dr. Raquel Bill Wilkins.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for that introduction, Jeffrey. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
So up next, I want to introduce you guys to our next most amazing dynamic panelist. I have with me Dr. Turia Richmond. Dr. Turia Monique Richmond is a native Chicagoan who attended the University of Illinois College of Medicine and School of Public Health, where she received her Doctorate of Medicine and Master's of Public Health. She is widely known as your total health doctor. Dr. Turia migrated from Chicago to Houston to pursue her residency at Baylor College of Medicine, Community and Family Medicine. Dr. Richmond is the CEO of Turia M. Richmond, MD, MPH, and Associates, PLLC. In her private practice, she offers services including primary care, women's health, sexual intimacy care. Her wellness center includes her clinic and a full-service spa and clinical research site. She was currently conducting a clinical trial for Black cis and transgender women with injectable PrEP. So I would like to bring in Dr. Taria Richmond.
Thank you. Thank you for having me this evening.
Dr. Derrick, I think we're going to be using the term or the words amazing, dynamic, awesome, and magnificent Black women all evening.
Yeah.
We have another one coming up here. It is my pleasure to present to the world this evening a very familiar voice when it comes to conversations around HIV, and that is the voice of Vanita Ray. Vanita was a member of Positive Women's Network, their board of directors, and it is a national membership organization for women living with HIV. Now she serves in a leadership role as the deputy director of that same organization. She has more than 20 years of experience working in underserved communities on social justice issues, including affordable housing, environmental justice, healthcare, and HIV. She served as the public I want to get this right, public policy manager for Legacy Community Health Services, which is now a federally qualified health center here in the city of Houston. There she monitored HIV-related health policy. We don't have conversations about health policy enough, and I love when Vanita talks about it, and managed an advocacy training program for people living with HIV. Vanita is awesome. And I'm going to end right there. She's amazing, and we're going to hear her heart on this evening. Welcome, Vanita.
Hey, thank you, Jeffrey, and thank you to the Links for having me, the Links Incorporated for having me.
We're excited to have you here. Wonderful, amazing, powerful, dynamic. So next, I will have the great honor of introducing to everyone tonight, Nettie Jones. Nettie Jones is a licensed psychotherapist who specializes in psychotherapy services to women who are wanting to find balance, reconnect with intimacy, live out their purpose, passion, and know their value of their voice. Women can learn to embrace the many seasons of life. Ms. Jones is passionate about providing collaborative and supportive care to her clients and eliminating the stigma around mental health that is so often a barrier to getting care. Ms. Jones's therapeutic approach is rooted in cognitive behavioral therapy. The focus is on challenging helpful cognitive distortions, sticking thinking. Ooh, oh, that was a tongue twister. Sticking thinking and behaviors, improving emotional regulation, emotional independence, and developmental of personal coping strategies that target solving problems that her clients are currently facing. Ms. Jones has years of experience working with women and women's issues. Ladies and gentlemen, Nettie Jones.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here tonight to do the thing I love to do best, which is to talk about mental wellness in women. So I'm ready for the conversation.
Excellent. Look, everyone, when we have conversations about HIV, particularly in our African-American community, we cannot have that conversation without having the voice of public health. And I consider the voice of public health in the city of Houston to be Marlene McNeese, who is the Deputy Assistant Director of the Bureau of HIV and STD and Viral Hepatitis Prevention here at the Houston Health Department. And that is just a little bit of the work that Marlene is doing now. She's well established in this field. She's nationally and internationally known for the work that she's done for over 26 years. I didn't even know it was that, that's a big number. But she started when she was very young. But she's played a leadership role in redefining the way in which public health and community support systems have responded to HIV in locally here in Houston, in Harris County, and across the nation. She has worked along with the Scientific Advisory Council in helping to co-chair that council, along with Baylor, UT Houston, and for AIDS research, our CFAR. She also has contributed to the work of an organization called UCHAPS. And UCHAPS was an organization that was first formed with the first 7 or 8 directly funded cities across the nation that were directly funded to do HIV prevention in each of these independent cities, individual cities, and Houston was one of those cities. And I hope later Marlene's going to talk about the work that she does with the President's Advisory Council, or PACHA. She holds a position in that particular community and also with NASDAQ. So she is very well known across the nation. And I don't think Houston appreciates her enough because she does some really great work. So welcome, Marlene McNeese.
Thank you, Jeffrey. So happy to contribute to the conversation tonight and excited that I'm back on the dais with the grand diva, Vanita Ray, and excited to meet the rest of the panelists. I think this conversation is going to be so impactful and hopefully touch many, many women. So thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. So I again have the honor of introducing everyone to Erica Lewis. Erica Lewis is a certified family nurse practitioner specializing in caring for the mind, body, and soul. She received her Bachelor's of Science and is a registered nurse from Prairie View A&M University in 2008, where she specialized in med-surg and has worked in hospitals, skilled nursing facilities, schools, and even did some work as a travel nurse. Since 2016, she has worked in convenient and urgent cares, caring for those with urgent health care needs. She is currently employed at Dr. Taria Richmond and Associates, working in primary care and also AIDS Foundation Houston, focusing on HIV prevention and treatment. Erica is married and is the mother of 3 beautiful kids. In her spare time, she loves spending time with her family, reading, working in the ministry of her church, fishing, and crabbing. So I'm coming to that list. Her mission in life is to close the gap of healthcare disparities within underserved Black and Brown communities. Everyone, Erica Lewis.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here, and I'm looking forward to this dynamic conversation we will have tonight.
Awesome. So with that being said, I would love for us to just go ahead and just jump right into this. And everyone just kind of chime in and give us your thoughts and your opinions and your feelings, but based on how you show up in the world daily, why do you believe it's important for your voice to be a part of tonight's conversation? Let's Miss Vanita.
Sure. So clearly, anytime HIV is being discussed, and as a woman living with HIV, we need to be in the room. Folks only get one perspective when we have, folks well-intentioned, but our health providers and others, and there is a perspective that is lost, not present when someone living with lived experience is not in the room. So, I don't choose to show up in every space, but I definitely do a lot of work around Black women, racial justice, which to me, HIV is a racial justice issue in the first place. And so the opportunity to be on this panel with nothing but Black women always intrigues me. And I love talking with my sisters, but I'm real serious about HIV advocacy and ending stigma and changing the narrative around HIV. And so without being present, that can't happen. And so it is so important to be here, and it's an honor to be asked. And I really, really am looking forward to sharing my perspective. I never thought I'd be showing up in spaces around my own personal medical diagnosis and how to use that lived experience in a way that educates and maybe gives hope to someone else, and also allows me to live out loud, which is a privilege. So it's just a lot of good things about being present and making sure I represent my Black women and the broader HIV community in every space I'm in.
Amazing. Dr. Raquel Bill Wilkins, share your voice with us.
Sorry, guys, I was on mute. You know, one of the things that always took me by surprise when I was at Thomas Street was how many patients would come in the room and they were shocked to see a Black woman psychiatrist there. And sometimes my presence being there was enough to actually have them take that leap of faith and stay and actually talk about what was on their mind, and really engage in mental health wellness. And so, you know, as a Black psychiatrist, there's only 1% of psychiatrists in the United States are Black. And so as a woman, you know, that's probably 0.5%. And so I think in any room that I'm in, just being who I am is sort of unique on its own. But I think it also opens the door for other Black people in particular, to really reduce the stigma, not just around mental health, but also around HIV. And so that's why I think my voice is important. And I hope that I get to share some of that experience with you all tonight.
Awesome. Marlene, can I pick your brain for a moment?
Absolutely.
Why do you think, you know, what are some of the reasons why Black women, regardless of their education and economic status, don't feel comfortable requesting HIV testing or even STI testing from their primary care providers?
You know, and I'll start off by saying, just from my perspective and experience, unfortunately, a lot of women believe that their health provider has taken care of those tests and taken care of those kinds of concerns and issues on behalf of them for their health care. And really, I see healthcare as a partnership between, you know, myself as a patient and, you know, the trained medical specialist, and the idea that together we've got to work to ensure that my health is where it needs to be. So unfortunately, when women go in for an annual well exam, they just believe that these tests are being done. And unfortunately, that's not always the case and not routinely the case. And certainly still in Texas, it really depends on the lens and the leadership of your medical provider for offering the tests and having conversations with you about it. So for me, I've had the experience where I've gone to my own personal medical provider who has said to me, "Oh, you don't need those tests, do you?" And I had to pause and I said, "Unfortunately, you don't know who I am or what I do for a living, but let me enlighten you." And the idea that hopefully my exchange with my provider, who's a lovely woman, very well intentioned, but she just simply made assumptions based on my professional life, my ability to have health insurance, about what was the private nature of my sexual activity and my relationships. She just made some assumptions. And so I wanted to make sure that I not only had the opportunity to advocate for myself, but educate her as she begins to service other women, and making sure that women are made aware that yes, these tests are necessary. Anyone who's sexually active, quite frankly, anyone who's sexually active, quite frankly, should have these tests done on a regular basis. And it's not a value statement or issue or indictment on who you are as a person and your character. It really is about wellness and wholeness. And I'm so grateful for this panel tonight. Dr. Derek, Dr. Baggett, Jeffrey, you all pulled together an outstanding panel. I don't think I could have crafted it any better, because it really is about the collective wholeness and wellness for women. And HIV and some of these sexual health concerns are just a part of who we are. and what makes us well and whole. So happy to be a part of it. But that's my long answer to the question. My sense is, unfortunately, people believe they're being tested and they're not.
Okay. Good. Marlene, thank you for that. And I'm going to stick with you for just a minute because I've heard you share that story before, and it's such a significant story for anyone to hear, but particularly for Black women to hear. And I want you to just dig a little deeper and think about what you would say to one of your female friends, a Black female friend, a coworker, a colleague, someone at your church who came up to you, and because they know who you are and they know the work that you do, they share their story and they said, hey, Marlene, I asked my doctor to run these tests, and they were like, yeah, no, you don't really need that. I know what you did for you in that space, because you've shared that. But how would you coach that sister to address that particular situation? Because you are coach.
Yeah. No, great question. And for me, it really is about sharing with women that they have the power to take charge and be responsible for their own health. I loved when Dr. Baggett talked about the Links Incorporated, values early on in introducing the conversation. It really is about accountability and responsibility to self. So the idea that, someone said, they didn't offer it to me, I would absolutely empower and encourage them to walk back into a provider's office, or if they're not comfortable, choose another provider. I'll say a lot more about that, but I don't want to take up all the conversation tonight, because it really is about matching yourself with the right partnership where you know that you are in tandem together toward your health and wellness. And not every provider, that relationship is not automatically a soulmate match. And so we have to, date providers and find one that works for us, essentially. But I would encourage them to know their status. The idea that, understanding whether you are living with an HIV diagnosis and you didn't know it before, or you're negative, you're not living with one. It's important for you to know, because I think it begins the entryway to talk about steps that you can take for your overall sexual health. And the idea that it can become a gateway for you to access other support needs and open up a conversation with your provider about other related healthcare needs. So I just think it's a perfect gateway. And annual wellness exams is critical, but it's something practical and basic that every woman can do. And there are steps and actions that we can take during those visits to make sure that we get all of the maximum benefit from that encounter. And that includes not just screening for the sexual health issues, which we're talking about tonight, HIV, but also our annual breast exams and all of those other factors that matter for our overall well-being. And if they're not checked, and if the doctors don't want to do this particular screening or don't think you're required to have that particular screening, it's on us to push. So I would encourage her to walk in there armed with advocating and demanding all of the health screenings that we need and we need to have regularly.
Thank you, Marlene. Thank you. Dr. Derrick, I'm going to pitch back to you for a question for Dr.
Absolutely, because this just segues right into something I'm dying to know from Dr. Taria Richmond. Share with us, when female patients come into your clinic, your office, and they're requesting a full HIV plus STI testing panel, how do you handle that?
I give it to them. So I want to go back to your initial question about why is my presence necessary?
Oh,
and so
absolutely.
As a primary care physician, what I've learned and over time, even with my experience at Baylor and rotating through Thomas Street and Northwest Clinic and everything, is that HIV testing, HIV prevention, and HIV treatment is primary care. So if you come to my practice, you don't know who is who, and everybody is getting the essential care that they need. And typically, I'll tell you all the truth, a lot of women, they don't really understand their vulnerability, and a lot of times they don't ask. So when I ask, we talked about this before, that I get the clutching of the pearls, Dr. Richmond. Well, this is a sex positive, non-judgmental environment, and let's talk about it. I like to call it, let's get down to the kitty gritty. Let's really talk about it. Let's talk about, not only your safety, but also pleasure. We're going to have the entire conversation in your Well Woman's examination, or you may come in for something else, and we need to talk about it. And typically, we do test for HIV unless the patient tells us no, and we have that conversation about what all labs are being drawn and tested. Because I was speaking at a church a couple of weeks ago, and I had a small group, and one of the ladies said, "Oh, I got tested for everything." And I said, "Well, can you list out what you got tested for?" She was like, "I don't know. It's what the doctor said, they did everything." And I said, "Well, that it all depends on what you think is everything. And one way to be empowered is to ask for a copy of your labs, or to sign up for the portal so that you can see your labs and see what all the tests were that the doctor ran." So I am all for it. I'm a primary care doctor who believes in total health, and that includes again, HIV testing, prevention, and treatment.
So what kind of conversations do you have with your patients about HIV risk and risk reduction?
Absolutely. So again, I try to stay out of the judgmental space, but I also want to know, what are you doing? What ways do you engage in sex? What does that look like for you, so that we can talk about the ways that you can protect yourself? And so having those very open conversations about how you're having sex, where you're having sex, how can you protect yourself, is usually what I'll do in my visits with the patients. And again, a lot of times they're uncomfortable. They are so uncomfortable with these conversations, but they have to be had.
Do you tailor your conversations depending on the patient's age, being that these tend to be uncomfortable conversations?
I love that. So in a way, yes, the information does not change.
Good.
The information does not change. So if I have a middle-aged church woman or a young college student, the information does not change. The way I may express it may change, because you have to meet people where they are. But the information and the facts, that doesn't change.
So, and again, I'm so glad you brought this up, that you get to the nitty gritty. Can you say that?
Kitty gritty. The kitty gritty. Yes, ma'am.
Kitty gritty in your conversation. Sexual health many times is left out of healthcare visits, Erica Lewis, how do you fit the discussion of sexual health into your daily practice?
Yeah, so just like Dr. Richmond said, we incorporate sexual health with all our visits. If you come in for a physical, you come in for a Well Woman exam, it's just the same as asking, when was your last bowel movement? We need to know if you're sexually active. For example, I had a patient just the other day, 19-year-old. I said, "Are you sexually active?" She's like, "Not really." And I'm like, "What does that mean?" So we laughed, because she was like, "Well, I don't have it on a regular basis." I said, "Well, have you had sex before?" And she said, "Yes." And she was actually in for her first pap smear. So we had the whole discussion about, okay, you're sexually active. Are you using condoms? Well, I didn't do it. I didn't use one once. So we do the exam, and then I got her results actually yesterday, and she actually tested positive for chlamydia, but no symptoms. She had no signs of it, even in the exam, no signs. And stuff like that can easily be undetected for a long period of time if we do not do these testing for HIV, testing for STDs, which can lead to long-term conditions and serious conditions such as pelvic inflammatory disease, which can lead to ectopic pregnancies, or more seriously, infertility in the long run. So just a simple question about asking about sexual health today can prevent long-term problems tomorrow.
And are there certain techniques that you use that you found over your practice that help your patients feel comfortable to open up and be vulnerable about a conversation that they may not even have with themselves?
Yes, definitely. When I walk into a room, I try to make the patient feel as comfortable as possible. We have patients that range, from the younger girls, 16, a lot of 19-year-old college students we get from TSU, up into ladies, 70s and 80s. And so I definitely meet them where they are, but I try to make them feel as comfortable as possible. And I try to make the conversation more of like a girlfriend to girlfriend conversation, to where they're more open and able to express how they're feeling and their concerns that they have, and to let them know that it is a non-judgmental zone. And I'm here to make sure that they're well, mind, body, and soul. And so just making them feel comfortable, not using all that medical jargon, and just keeping it simple with the terminology. If they want to use slang terms, I can use slang terms. I try to stay up to date with everything,
Yes.
side piece, sneaky link, all that. They like to talk like that. So I don't mind talking like that. I meet them where they are to where we can get them whole. So that's what I do.
Love it. Dr. Richmond, Erica Lewis, get ready for y'all's phones to be ringing. Secretaries to take down notes, because I'm telling you, so many women just don't feel comfortable and they don't know where to go. And you basically told the entire audience, come, I can take care of you. We're going to talk. We're going to get down. We're going to handle everything. We're going to do all the testing, non-judgmental, open, just free. Allow people to be free.
Yeah.
So moving on to this next step here that I wanted to get into with Erica was PrEP. And everybody hears the word PrEP. What is PrEP? Even in my own practice, I have patients that are on PrEP, and some of the even staff don't understand. They're thinking, oh, this person has a positive diagnosis. That's why they're on the medications. Can you talk a little bit about what PrEP is? What
Yes.
the significance of it?
Yeah, so basically, PrEP is a pre-prophylactic medication that someone can take daily to prevent their risk of acquiring HIV. There are two medications that are used, Descovy and Truvada, and if taken correctly, as prescribed, which is daily, it can reduce their risk of HIV by up to 99%. And there's also another medication that we are now promoting, which is Apretude. It's an injection. And the first 2 doses are given on a monthly basis. And then after that, it's given on every other month. So for those that may not like to take medication daily, but are interested in preventing their risk of HIV, there's an option for you. You can come into the clinic every other month and get that injection to reduce your risk of acquiring HIV. I think it's a great medication for anyone that is sexually active, who is, even if you are in a monogamous relationship, because we still have patients that come in who they are in a monogamous relationship, but their partner is not in a monogamous relationship. So they have to make sure that they're always protecting themselves from all STDs, and that ranges from all age groups. We have women in their 60s and 70s that are coming in thinking they have, maybe a yeast infection, BV. We do a swab and they have trichomonas, and they're like, what's that? I'm like, ma'am, it's a sexually transmitted parasite. And they make me question myself. They're like, well, I didn't do that. And I have to go I call Dr. Richmond. Dr. Richmond, are you sure this is a sexually transmitted parasite? Because they telling me they didn't do this and they didn't do that. And then I've even had a patient have her husband call me on three-way and it's like, tell her what you told me. Tell her what you told me. And I'm like, she has trichomonas. He's like, I would never cheat on my baby and all that stuff. But it goes there. So you always have to take care of yourself first. Anybody can tell you anything. So I think PrEP is an amazing medication to prevent HIV from occurring in your life. If it's something you can take to prevent it, I think that it would be an awesome option for those people who are interested. And we do offer that at AFH and also at Dr. Richmond's office.
Awesome. Are there any concerns or fears or reasons why people shy away from PrEP, like side effects or?
Yes, some of the main side effects would be like diarrhea, nausea, stomach upset, headache, fatigue. But typically, if taken every day, within the first week to 2 weeks, those symptoms subside. and patients no longer have those symptoms. I've had a patient that I tried to get her on PrEP. She said, I took one dose and I was sick to my stomach. I was throwing up and I stopped taking it. I said, well, the benefit outweighs the temporary, side effects. So go ahead and continue to take it and the symptoms will subside. And then when following up with her a couple of weeks later, she said, yeah, the symptoms did subside. So definitely, as with any medication that you do take, there are side effects associated with it, but these side effects typically go away after 1 to 2 weeks. And we've had patients on it for years with no issues.
Great. Thanks, Erica. And I think at some point this evening, we're going to talk a little bit about stigma, because I think, and this is not my panel, but I think that our biggest challenge and our biggest barrier to particularly African Americans accessing PrEP is around the stigma, the conversations that we still struggle with having as human beings who are sexual, and just the fear of the judgment. If somebody knows I'm having sex, what will they think of me? So I think we're going to get to that later on, but I needed to plant the seed. So Marlene, I want to ask you, because of your position in public health, can you talk to us a little bit about the work that the public health departments, and that's the Houston Health Department, Harris County Health Department, are doing in concert with community support systems around HIV prevention and linkage to care, and ensuring that we are growing our city that's growing our virus suppression rate?
Yeah, no, certainly I'll try to give a brief overview about what we are able to offer and provide from the city county perspective in terms of support for these programs, and how, we really have a value on doing so in tandem with community. This is not about a government top-down approach to the work, because that of the communities that we're talking about offering services with. These are communities that are already, you mentioned stigma, but discriminated against, marginalized, have challenges accessing information, and even for well-to-do Black women, accessing appropriate information is a challenge. And for all of those reasons that you're alluding to, Jeffrey, around stigma and a little bit of internalized shame, the idea that we have now, I think, move to a place where we try to talk less with women about personal risks. And let me clarify that, because I think we've missed the boat in our public messaging in HIV for the last 30 years, and really got ingrained in a lot of people's hearts and minds that this is not an infection that I need to worry about if I'm not gay and if I'm not white. And I think we so missed the boat that a lot of people, even today, even as much as we have spent time talking about, it's about just risk and encounters, and not about a value placed on your character, people still believe that it really doesn't impact them. They're not at risk. So lately, we've been trying to work with touting our services through a status neutral approach. And what I mean by that is really pushing the information out in communities that testing for HIV and STIs is available, and where they're available, working in partnership with community and federally qualified health centers and community organizations like AIDS Foundation Houston, working with our provider partners. Good to see you tonight again, Dr. Wilkins and others. We just try to make sure that people are aware that there are lots of resources available to take care of themselves, whether they test positive for HIV or whether they test negative for HIV. I'm glad that we have the mental health and behavioral health aspect to the conversation tonight also, because for a lot of women in and out of relationships, but I'll just speak for myself, going through and navigating, an adult life and having relationships and having partnerships and managing, phenomenal careers. I think we can all relate to that aspect. The idea that it can be overwhelming And it can be very difficult to admit as a strong individual, as a strong person, I need help. I need to talk to somebody. I've got questions. I really don't know. We try to move along in life as if we have the answers and we know what to do. So between the city and the county, there's lots of access to services around treatment. Now we're prioritizing a lot of support for behavioral health, mental health resources and services. But there's no reason anyone living with HIV need to go without HIV care. There's no reason for that other than you not reaching out and not knowing where to reach out and access that information. So any of us on this panel tonight can help with that. But the other side is the prevention side and being able to access, testing as well as PrEP. I'm glad that came up in the conversation. But the options, if folks don't like pills, the long-acting injectable PrEP is available, so folks can just get a shot. But there's no way that HIV ever has to dominate your life. And this is a conversation Vanita has all the time. You can live and thrive with HIV if you're diagnosed. But if you're not, and you may need other support services, I don't want to minimize that. Still a need and a gap in African-American communities, and certainly amongst African-American women.
Great. Thanks, Marlene. And this next question, I really want to ask it of Marlene and Vanita, because I think their experiences are going to give us some different information about the same topic, and that is COVID, this pandemic space that we've been in since 2020. How has COVID impacted first the work from the public health perspective? And then that's for Marlene, but then Vanita, what's been the impact that COVID has had on the communities of people who are living with HIV?
Sure. Vanita, do you want to go first? Okay. I just wanted to say from our perspective, it's been really, really tough in some ways, and we've learned a lot of lessons because of COVID and the pandemic and others. It's been tough in that the communities that I spoke about earlier, who were already marginalized and challenged with getting access to healthcare services in the first place, were even more deeply and severely impacted because of COVID. I literally ran into a pregnant female just at a random store, and I just happened to chat it up with her, and she talked about the fear and anxiety she was going through as a new mom who couldn't readily have in-person appointments with her primary care doctor, and just had all these concerns about what she needed to be doing for her and her baby. And it just broke my heart. And so I just have seen that over and over again. We know that access to HIV testing went down. We know access and being able to have medical appointments, even for people living with HIV. I think our community and our provider community tried in every way possible to rally, but it became a challenge, and that's the reality. So I will say that I think we lost ground, and it became tough for a lot of people during COVID. But what lessons we learned that I think we are absolutely going to use moving forward is adding additional options for how people can take care of their own health care, and adding home-based testing opportunities for HIV is vital. It's critical. So that just provides another option. If I can't get into a doc, how can I get the medical services in my home and in a place where it can benefit me when I need it? So that's one aspect that I think I would say we learned from COVID, but certainly I think communities heard a lot from COVID, and I'm not sure we've yet recovered from that. But I'll stop there and turn it over to Vanita.
No,
Thanks, Marlene.
Yeah, thank you, Marlene. So COVID, it just the impact on people living with HIV and HIV communities was just devastating. I mean, it just really exposed what we already knew existed around health disparities. Mm-hmm. And the same people that we talked about as essential workers were the same people in our community that were on the front lines. The only good that to me came from that is, you had all these jurisdictions declaring public health as a racism public health as a racist issue, but the reality was we knew this all along. I work for one of the only national membership organizations for women and people of trans experience living with HIV. The majority of our members live at the poverty line or below. Poverty is a common denominator for vulnerability across communities. We have folks who live in rural communities. If they were already impacted and poor and struggling, it impacted just economic security. Folks couldn't go to work who are living on tight budgets. It cut off access to the clinics or wherever, if they did have a support group, and induced even further isolation that folks were already feeling. If you're not being, everybody thinks we can just talk about living with HIV. I said, it's a privilege for me to live out loud. The majority don't. They still can't. Stigma is still what it is, and it is still rampant. There's no pill for stigma. You give me a pill, but the people out there stigmatizing us don't get one. And so the folks who are living in rural and other communities and even urban ones were further isolated. We saw increases in food insecurity. We saw increases in intimate partner violence. We don't provide direct services in our organization, but we started a virtual support group that is still going on, because even though folks can get around a little better now, folks are still needing it. One of the biggest impacts was, some of the language, and y'all know there was a lot of misinformation going on. So medical mistrust was already high in our communities because we don't trust this stuff. That women, I lost my train of thought right then, but medical mistrust going on. Where was I going with that, y'all? And people not getting the right information and the language around COVID. I mean, I was traumatized by the language. It reminds me of the early days of the AIDS epidemic, the stigmatizing language, that the way COVID was talked about. And for women living with HIV, we were in fear of 2 viruses, not 1. We were already living with HIV, immune systems compromised. And now here comes COVID and we can't even breathe, right? And sometimes COVID was mentioned in the same sentence with HIV when they talked about a virus. So stigma and stress. One of our big leaders that I have great admiration transitioned from COVID. And this was happening a lot. And she chose to go home because a lot of folks are showing up at health clinics and being sent home, Black folks. And she chose to go home to pass away because she didn't want to do it in isolation. And a reminder of the days when she was diagnosed and people couldn't come in the room because she had been around that long. One of the few that survived. So COVID, never mind the other medical issues. Folks think that taking ARTs is without side effects. We're already dealing with tons. Right. So I did not want another vaccine, another nothing, but I had to acquiesce because I'm already immunocompromised. So, we're dealing with the side effects from ART. So when folks talk about PrEP, one of the things we don't say is it's an HIV medication. It is a serious medication. And I agree it's an alternative to getting HIV. So I understand that. But in sitting in a conference one day, the International AIDS Conference, and hearing them talk about PrEP like it wasn't a strong medicine really kind of got to me when I said, do we know that it's an HIV med? And I want folks to take it because I'm grateful to be living. But people were distrustful and we didn't know who to trust. And we raised money for mutual aid and it was gone so fast we could not keep it in because folks were struggling with eviction notices. And that on top of the fact that y'all providers know we're not supposed to be stressing, right? We're trying to count T cells, right? And T cells, if you don't know, is the way we gauge how strong my immune system is. So I'm trying to hold on to every one of them, right? And during COVID, I'm gonna tell you, it was not a fun game, and our community suffered, and they're still going through it. So I think we need to just understand the additional stress it caused for folks already living with a stigmatized condition. And now I've already had COVID, and so it really was a flashback to the health department kept calling me, and I was like, finally had to block them because it's like it was treating me like a target again. HIV. It reminded me all over again and having flashbacks on folks trying to monitor my movements and treat me like I don't have the common sense to take care of myself. When this time, all I did was breathe. But the first time I did the same thing that the rest of the world does too. But why is that condition so stigmatized? And we saw it with COVID. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Vanita. Thanks, Marlene. That's a good conversation around COVID and HIV and the impact of this pandemic on persons living with HIV. Dr. Bill Wilkins, we talked about this last night in our run of show. I'd like for you to talk to us about some of the things that we get confused about, some of the things that we are ashamed to talk about, and sometimes we're even ashamed to let people know we know what it means. And that is gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation.
All right. So if you all see, both Vanita and Marlene they have their pronouns in their title there. So that's one example right off the bat of gender identity, right? So they're identifying as the female gender right off the bat. And so our gender identity is our personal sense of our own gender. It could be the gender that we were assigned at birth, or it could be the gender that, over time we've grown to realize, I feel more like I'm a female than I do like I'm a male. And so we're seeing a rise in people identifying as transgender. I think earlier somebody mentioned cisgender, and that's not cis, S-I-S, which I'm sure many of us would latch on to that terminology as Black women, but it's C-I-S, gendered. And then there's transgendered, indicating somebody who is now identifying as a gender that's different than what they were assigned at birth. And then from that next step, there's gender expression, right? So how do you express your gender identity? That could be in terms of our appearance, the way we dress, and our behavior. And then our sexual orientation is our identity in relation to the gender or genders to which we're sexually attracted or sexually involved with. And oftentimes, I think, it goes unnoticed, I think, especially in the Black community, that we do have transgender male to female people, right? And so when we're having the conversation about what is a woman, those identities often get excluded. And there is a lot of anxiety around expressing that gender or making that transition, not just in the society at large, but within our own, Black community. Every day I feel like when I'm scrolling social media, I see somebody on a podcast talking about, should women be submissive? Or, I think TD Jakes got in a little bit of trouble a couple of months ago because he got up there and he was talking about, gender roles and what role a woman is supposed to be, right? We get these messages from a very young age. The older women in the church tell you it's not ladylike to not have on pantyhose in church, or it's not ladylike to sit without your legs crossed, right? So we get these messages from a very young age. And we've thrown this word stigma around a lot. And I think in terms of Black women and our sexual health, there's so much anxiety around being perceived as promiscuous, right? A lot of the stereotypes that you see of Black women, you think about music videos, the video vixens, all these images of these voluptuous Black women with their boobs out and their butt out. Is that a way that we express our femininity? And how does that translate into our sexual health and our sexual relationships? Do we actually feel empowered as women to go into a relationship or a sexual, partnership with somebody and actually say, yes, you do need to wear a condom, and not sort of play that submissive role of whatever the man wants, that's what he's going to get in this situation. And oftentimes, even we were talking earlier about testing, about going in and requesting a test. There's a lot of anxiety around, how am I going to be perceived? Are people going to assume that I'm sleeping around or I'm a sex worker? Are they going to make certain judgments about who I am as a Black woman? When we're already sort of faced with just that societal stereotyping of who we are as a people. And are we feminine enough? Or are we presenting as masculine, quote unquote, if we're more assertive or more aggressive in terms of asking for what we want? So I think all of those terms, the gender identity, the way we express our gender, and the way that we engage in sexual relationships, all of that goes together. And it's a really important piece of the conversation, particularly around HIV, because I do think, like Marlene was saying, a lot of people assume this is a gay man's disease, or this only happens to white people, and don't necessarily know the statistics around the rates of HIV transmission, not only in the Black community, but specifically in heterosexual Black women who oftentimes are in monogamous relationships with a male partner. I kind of answered a couple of questions. I knew what was coming after the first question, so tried to be concise so everybody else could have a chance to talk, but I hope that answers the larger question.
You did a great job. Thank you. And I saw you doing it. I heard you doing it. I looked down. I was like, okay, she's getting this one, and she's getting this one. So no, great job. And I do want to just go back just a little bit. What's the level of freedom that is attached to owning one's gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation when it comes to your mental and your physical and your spiritual health?
I think it's everything, right? I mean, if you wake up every day and you're the first person to judge you, right? Then you're going out into a world that's predisposed to judging you or stereotyping you. The work kind of has to start, right, individually within our own selves to say, do I feel comfortable in my own skin? And do I feel comfortable actually representing myself? Am I trying to be something that I'm not, just to sort of please other people? So like Dr. Richmond was saying, how do you receive pleasure? How do you actually enjoy these experiences? For some of us, it may be, doing our hair, doing our makeup, putting on a cute outfit, putting on some heels. And in some ways, that's how we're expressing our gender. But I do think if you already are sort of, insecure about that piece of it, it goes a long way into that internal monologue that we have about ourselves, where we're saying, I'm not pretty enough. I'm not smart enough. Nobody wants me, et cetera, et cetera. And then we kind of set ourselves up to get into these really toxic environments, not just in our interpersonal relationships, but even in our workplaces, if we don't necessarily feel comfortable about who we are. So, Nettie Jones, she hasn't had a chance to speak, but, so much of the work that she does around empowering women to get into those thoughts, this, stinking thinking about how we actually can be our own worst enemy before the world has a chance to even take a crack at it.
Great.
And that's exactly who we want to hear from next. Nettie Jones, the girlfriend's therapist. If a client came to you and said that she was struggling with gender identity, expression, and sexual orientation in regards to, like we just discussed, the stigma that's around us socially, family, religious-wise, and she also tells you that she lacks confidence in being able to have that freedom, what would your response be to her?
Well, I'm going to kind of piggyback what Dr. Bill Wilkins has said is first of all, owning it, right? That's important. Her level of comfort in understanding clearly where she is with who she is, right? Or whom she identifies as, or he, they, right? That's the most important thing. I would imagine that this is something that's not new, right? And so you've had an opportunity to embrace wherever you are, whomever you are. And so being able to have other people expect, to accept you that way, sometimes it takes time. And so families may not be as receptive to it initially, but just like you had to understand, you have to give them the space to understand. And also the space to get knowledge and information. Everybody's uniquely different, and so people come not with just the gender identity, the gender expression, but life, I wanted to kind of comment on what Vanita said about all the disparities and all of the challenges during, COVID. But there's trauma, there's anxiety, there's depression. All of those things I find with my clients that are really trying to identify with themselves sexually or their gender or, who am I inside of this body? It doesn't quite feel right. And it is very difficult because people want to feel accepted, but it has to start with self-acceptance. And so a lot of times the focus for me is the client and where they are, not the family, right? Not the people, whether they accept me as I am, but that person. And that's the freedom and that's the power that an individual can go out and walk in that will allow them to be free and to be who they are. And I believe that's what allows people to love them where they are.
Amazing. So you, as well as Dr. Bill Wilkins, have both echoed the same thing, being able to wake up in the morning in yourself and have that acceptance within yourself. Are there any tips or advice that you may be able to give our listeners who are dealing with this thing right now?
What I would like to say is that, as an advocate for mental wellness, I don't know how we could even do this webinar without talking about wellness, because mental wellness, that is wellness. And any type of health disparity or any type of health challenge that we have to consider where we are emotionally and psychologically. And, you guys have talked about medications, and sometimes medications have side effects. And so we experience certain things, and we have to be able to talk about those things, attend to those things, and get the support that we really need. And so I don't know how we could talk about HIV, AIDS, any type of health challenges without talking about mental wellness and the importance of that. I'm blessed to have an opportunity to talk with women every day. And, difficult conversations is what we do. And, talking about preferences, talking about taboos, those are the things that you talk about with a therapist, a good therapist anyway, and so I'm going to have to use the kitty gritty when talking to my clients. But yeah, thank you for an opportunity to talk about the importance of owning your truth, right? And we could all benefit from that. And sometimes you got to do the work. You got to do the self-work, get to know who he, she, they, it, whatever, who that is inside, okay, and nurture it. So thank you.
Amazing. Vanita, I want to come back to you with a question since we've kind of gotten into this topic. As a Black woman living with HIV, what are some of the barriers or challenges that a person may face when dealing with intimate relationships with other individuals with a positive status and with individuals without a positive status?
Yeah, so the probably
Vanita, I'm sorry. I just want to stretch you just a bit. So I know that when we hear the word intimate and intimacy, we think physical, but can you speak to both, or maybe all three, physical, emotional, and spiritual intimacy? Can you?
Ooh, you want me to go there? Physical, emotional, and what?
Spiritual.
Spiritual.
Wow. So Jeffrey is talking about my journey, right, to here, 19 years ago. Wow, being diagnosed April 2nd, 2003, living my dream life as an attorney, and just passed the bar a few years before that, had my dream job, dream house, all of this stuff after coming from, some rocky beginnings. And I get the call, and y'all, I did it through a physical. I remember going for this physical, and I wanted to say, oh, I know I hadn't had a test in a while and wanted to ask for that test. And no one ever asked me. And I'm 64 years and never a doctor tried to talk to me about my sexual practices. I would welcome that conversation. you don't get to put it in my chart if you don't talk to me about it. So we got to have that conversation too, where doctors feel the liberty, because I'm living with HIV, to write stuff in my chart that wasn't real. That didn't used to happen before. But going in and getting that call, and for me, folks think just because you tell me it's not a death sentence, all of our fear isn't about the fear of dying. It's about the fear of living with this and the stigma that folks still, our society just is permeated, the narrative about who I am. And so for any woman, you know, wanting to be in relationships after an HIV diagnosis, most of us have a huge fear around that. And, you know, we have to begin to accept, and you guys talked about this, a little self-love, but that is a process, not an event. So for me, it took a 4-year span of darkness and what I know is depression to walk through, you know, should I live or die with this? Because I didn't want to have to tell a partner. I didn't want to have to be in the room. I've been in the room where someone said, why are Black women most impacted? And another Black woman said, because they're promiscuous. And I guess she wasn't talking about herself, just those of us living with HIV. And it only takes one. There's not a 50 partner requirement for getting HIV, for contracting it. And so the fact that and people do die from this and still do, but clearly a lot of us get to live. But my journey to wholeness went through that whole thing of depression, feeling less than, guilt or shame of what I had done so differently when I knew intellectually I hadn't, but the journey wasn't an intellectual journey. It was a spiritual journey. It was an emotional journey. And when I got to finally the place of either saying, kill yourself or find a way to move on, and I made a decision to move on, I had to begin to learn how to heal. And for me, I did it on a yoga mat. I did it in a lot of other ways by claiming power over my health. I drove my HIV doctors nuts because they could no longer direct me without me agreeing. Up until then, even as an attorney, I felt HIV was too big. Where I was outspoken before, I became passive because I didn't, it was bigger than I can handle. And I think a lot of people lose that. Y'all just want us to take a pill when we want to kill ourselves, right? Or, you know, I'm watching TV and damn it, here comes an HIV commercial. And that is the last thing I want to see. I don't want to talk to nobody or tell nobody. So we're not always running to tell the family and all that because there's still a lot of shame associated with this diagnosis. And so for me, you know, after a 4-year run and beginning making a decision to move on, and from 2007 to 2011, when I went public, I knew in that process that I couldn't share my status with people until your reaction to my status didn't have power over me. And that meant that I had to do some work about acceptance, and that acceptance took time. So that immediate need to get over it is not there for all of us. And for me, when that happened, I began to take power, and I did it through fitness, and I did it through a lot of other ways that I knew I couldn't cure me, because even 4 years, I wanted the call that said we made a mistake, because everybody who says it's not a big deal, in the back of their minds, we always feel like saying, whew, I'm glad it ain't me, because that's what I said in the years ago myself. And I'm gonna tell y'all, when I went on that spiritual journey and coming out of my diagnosis, and then sought help from a therapist at the end, you know, that finally really put the nail for me or set me free, because I was already on the road, because I sought out mental health before, and I would go to one visit and stop. I knew more about them than they knew about me, because everybody wanted me to practice an event instead of a process. And I think we got to let people be where they are. And it became an emotional and a spiritual journey for me that I did in 2011 go public, and I was ready for it because I accepted the fact when I wasn't ready that I didn't move on other people's timetables. So when the relationships I tried to have in the midst of that depression were not whole, they were not me. It was great gratitude, more or less, of somebody willing to accept my diagnosis for me making a whole wellness decision about a relationship. So, and that means my friendships too, because I just dropped off the face of the earth when I was diagnosed. Who wants to tell anybody? You don't want to think it yourself. So the process for me, when I went through it, y'all, my T cells, which had stayed at a place around 350, doubled when my spiritual and emotional health got better. My doctor finally said, we're just worried about you taking the pill and just the physical, because he didn't know what else to do with me, but it just changed. So I think that's the process. And you women have to feel that comfort level in their own gut of who they share with, who they tell, and even that involves family members and others. And so trying to tell a partner is not always comfortable. So sometimes we don't, right? So it's a journey, Jeffrey and Dr. Derek, and it's not a quick one. And we need to allow each other space to do this. And so but stigma, internal and external, is some of the biggest barriers and challenges. People's perception of who we are, people's idea about HIV and the people who have it, and then how we internalize that shows up in our intimate relationships. And it just takes work. And society doesn't seem to be, after 41 years, getting ready to let go of this stigma. So we got to do the work.
Thank you, Vanita. I appreciate your honesty, your transparency, and your willingness to share your story. Dr. Derek?
Yeah, so throughout my practice and just, being out in social networks, I've been told by many people, particularly African Americans and people in the Black community, that they want to stay away from HIV testing because they feel that if they test positive, then their status is going to be shared across the land and all over the office and over the clinic, and everybody's going to be whispering and talking about it. Erica and Dr. Richmond, can you please share with us what happens when someone tests positive in your clinic?
Erica, do you want to do AAFH and start down first?
Yeah, I can go first, no problem. So at AFH, we have a Start Now program. With the Start Now program, it is geared towards patients who are either newly diagnosed with HIV or who have been out of care for over a year. So pretty much what we do, we get them in, we discuss the diagnosis, answer any questions, we do additional testing, we get them started on medication that day, and they also leave with a 30-day prescription. And it doesn't just end there. We have a case manager who will then connect them to long-term care. And we also have someone, Titan, who will go with them to their first appointment, because a lot of patients with these new diagnoses, they're overwhelmed with emotions, feelings, just like Ms. Vanita just expressed. And, we have come a long way with HIV treatment and research, but the emotions are still the same, like she said. Mm-hmm. It's a process. It's a lot of to take in. You think about the loss of possible friendships, relationships, a lot of things cross your mind. So we have someone there to go with you in your first appointment so you don't feel alone. And also in their first appointments, there's questions that they don't even know to ask. So to have someone there with them to walk them through, to say, well, what about this? So that question is answered for that patient is phenomenal. And I'm glad to know that AFH does provide that service for all patients who are a part of Start Now.
So I would just jump in to say that in the private practice, we mirror what AFH does with Start Now. So we do have a caseworker, a mental health caseworker on site. And a lot of our positive diagnoses actually come from our community partnerships with the local colleges and things like that. And so we mirror that the same process. And a lot of times we refer our patients to AFH for Start Now. Most of the time we refer for Start Now.
And Dr. Derek, I want to ask Marlene, because you in your question, you talked about the fear of where does my information go? That's a public health question. So Marlene, can you just give us a tidbit about the Bureau of Epidemiology, surveillance, disease intervention specialist? Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so as the public health authority, your local public health department receives reports of any statewide notifiable condition, of which HIV is one of them. So a lab report does come and get reported from your provider's office or from the laboratory that conducted the test to the local health department, and they are required to do that by law. But once it's received at the local health department, our data management and surveillance, what Jeffrey is alluding to, has lots of protections around that data and not releasing names. And in the 28 plus years I've been in HIV, and even here in Texas, we've never had a breach of data around releasing confidential HIV information on a patient or a person. So we do report numbers of cases, and we are accountable to be transparent to the public about, what does the epidemic look like in Houston. We're accountable to report that to our federal colleagues at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. However, all of that is de-identified and aggregated information. And so your name is never reported to the federal government, as some people believe. But we do use that information to give information back to community, just like we're doing this evening. In Houston, we've got 1,200 cases of HIV diagnoses each and every year. That's been steady for a while. But, as we've been talking about tonight, the reason why we're having this conversation, particular to Black women, is of all these reported cases that have come to us as the public health authority around who's living with HIV, who's been diagnosed with HIV, we know that almost 50% are amongst African Americans, 47% to be exact. And the other 39%, so more than 70%, amongst people of color, because the other 39% are among Hispanics, and particularly for Black women. We're outranking 4-1 amongst all women who are reported and diagnosed with HIV. It's Black women, 4-1 than any other group. So it is important that we do have this information reported as a reportable condition by law, but we do not share and maintain really strict protocols and safeguards around the use of that data. And so no names, and your name and your specific information is never shared outside of the public health authority.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marlene, for sharing that with us, because that's powerful information that we needed to share with all of our sisters out here. Kind of wrapping up the remainder of our webinar, we've definitely hit on amazing topics. The importance of mental health has been discussed extensively, as well as dealing with a lot of grief and loss that happened during the pandemic and those that have been left unaddressed post-pandemic. My last question is going to be both geared towards Nettie Jones and Vanita Ray. What are some of the ways that people living with HIV can deal with their own mental health while processing issues that have been left unaddressed post-pandemic? Nettie, if you want to chime in.
Okay. Well, I really, really love what Vanita said, is that it's the process, and you have to meet people where they are. And it's not about my timing or the clinician's timing. It is about the client's timing. And so grief is something that is experienced over time. There are all of these steps to grief, but everybody grieves differently, right? And so grief is a process. And I just believe that finding a safe space to talk, where you are allowed to feel what you feel and to be where you are and accept where you are. And just because you're here today doesn't mean 6 months from now you're going to be in that same space. So if this is where you are, accept where you are and move through that. I believe with every struggle, there is some silver lining. That is how we grow. That is how we gain strength. That is how we soar. And so life challenges create opportunities for a beautiful life, right? But you so eloquently put that, Vanita, when you said, it's not somebody else's timing. And you can't just fix me. You can't just say, I can't just talk this away and feel better. Because when you wake up every day, you still deal with what you went to sleep with. It is a process. So that's what I say about the loss of anything. In grief, we all experience grief at some level, right? But the loss of how you envision your life to be. And it's to create the space to say, this is how I want my life to be as I move forward through that whole process. So that's what I would say for anybody who's recently or has been diagnosed or has not, and just in that place of not feeling, that or feeling that you went lost something, whether it's the loss of self or loss of a loved one or loss of the life that you thought you would have.
Wow, Nettie, that was beautiful because this is a difficult, everybody's so different, but the first thing I would say to a person living with HIV is that it's going to be okay. I mean, I can't tell you when or how, but it is. And that, I don't say this much, but I mean it, that if I can process and walk through it, it wasn't pretty, it wasn't quick. I just didn't kill myself before it happened. We have programs that say don't quit 5 minutes before the miracle. That's what it was for me. I had a life before HIV. I wasn't looking for nothing. I didn't need this addition to my story, but I have it now. And it's changed the way I see things. It's changed the way I've experienced life. And one therapist that I went to before I was really willing to do anything, those couple therapists that I ended up learning more of their business than they learned of mine, because I really went there. I didn't want to be fixed. I wanted to sit in my misery because I didn't want to accept this. And for me, acceptance was the key. It just was a process. But she told me that, because I told her I want my life back. That's all I wanted. I wanted to go back. I woke up out of a depression and I had moved to Houston. And to be with my daughter and sister, because I was moving here to die. That's what I wanted to do. I was moving here to die, just be with them, and kind of coming to and decide, oh shit, I want to live. What the hell am I doing in Texas? And I wanted to go back to DC. I wanted to get all that back. And a little voice that said, you need to be still and heal. And that's what I chose to do. And it took a long time before I was even willing to walk into a support group. And when I got there finally, maybe 4.5 years later, I remember I went there sharing exactly where I were, and everybody wanted me to feel better and say, oh, girl, we are so good. God is good. It's going to be good. I was like, I don't feel that. Talk about yourselves. I'm pretty upset and I'm angry and I don't want to be better. And because I feel like I accepted it, when I went public in 2011, them people still sitting in that circle, because the world wants us to feel better and to be happy because it's not a death sentence. And we say it whether we feel it or not. And we're really not healing, folks. We really need to give people patience and space to really grieve what it is. She told me I had to find purpose in the new path. And y'all, I did not want to hear that because I wanted my old life. But you know what? I need to go back and find that therapist one day, because I only saw her once. And I just didn't want to hear that then. That's exactly what I had to do, is find purpose in the new path. I never knew I'd be on here using my professional skills and talking about my personal business. When I went public, I had to go ask my daughter, who walked through this with me, was it okay? Because see, when I go public, so does she. And she's got a life. And she's an attorney as well, and had to deal with people in her firm coming up to her, asking her about her mother. So there was still a lot of shame with that. Let's be real, right? I have grandsons who the baby told him who I was when he got up there and talked about people living with HIV, and I'm trying to, and they see that's not what it looked like up front, right? So I need folks to really be mindful of the stigma, intersectional stigma, because remember, Black women live at the intersection of race and gender. So we're feeling the issues around our race, and we're dealing with the inequities associated with our gender. It's what makes us so vulnerable. The data that Marlene was giving y'all about how much Black women, we got to give the story behind the data. And the story is we're experiencing vulnerability due to racism and gender inequities, and that increases our vulnerability for HIV. and the reality of that. So we gotta, when you can tell Black women why they're here is not just because they didn't know better or they had sex like the rest of the world, or we didn't ask enough questions because I beat myself up for not putting on that condom, when y'all, half the world doesn't put on the condom, and I want folks to wear one, but we don't need to beat up our sisters for not, because we don't feel empowered then. I would just work on the empowerment. How do we help them achieve that self-love we talk about? But for myself, I didn't always practice, because talking it is a lot easier. So I think if we can have a community that doesn't see women differently, that the church would daylight HIV, so them sisters that sitting in there can stop being, because there's a difference to be secrecy out of need to know. But the secrecy out of shame is something that is hard to breathe, y'all. And so if we can really find a way to change the narrative, change, it ain't just about sex, y'all. There's structural and systemic reasons that Black women are most impacted, not just because we're having more sex, because Blacks as a whole are a little more conservative sexually, what the data shows. So find purpose in the new path, find somebody else living with HIV to talk to. And just know, if I could get through this, you can too. And it is about feeling better about myself. It's not just about my T cells and my viral load, which the world might make you think it is, but it is not. It's how you feel about you. And you too can have that one day. And I really hope, if you're listening, that you will look me up somewhere and get connected to other people living with HIV who can walk you through what you're going through like no one else can. So thank y'all.
Wow. Jeffrey, just give me a moment here. Wow. Tonight's webinar has been incredible. It has changed not only my life, but I know it's changed every single person who's watching and will watch this in the days, weeks, months, future years to come. Just let me speak each one of your names: Vanita Ray, Dr. Taria Richmond, Dr. Raquel Bill Wilkins, Nettie Jones, Marlene McNeese, Erica Lewis. I just needed to say the names of these 6 powerful, amazing, courageous, brave, open, smart, intelligent Black women that joined us tonight to educate everybody. Let's spread the word. Let's spread it. Whew. This was powerful. We touched on everything from testing, where to test, how to test, what happens if your doctor doesn't want to test you, where does your test information go? We talked about the mental health of surrounding the different issues that revolve around our society amongst secrecy with HIV, gender identity, sexual orientation. This was so incredible. We could go on and on, but ladies and gentlemen, I would like to bring back to the stage the president of the Greater Pearland Area Chapter of the Links Incorporated, Dr. Antrice Paget.
Thank you. It's very rare that I'm at a loss for words, but tonight is one of those times. And that's because in the multiple hats that I wear, in my day job, I teach African American history, humanities, but I'm also the founding director of Women and Gender Studies at Houston Community College. So I'm sitting here listening to this great panel, and in my mind, I'm saying some of your comments align with the scholarship and the research, but a lot of it doesn't. And what's important about that is that our voices must always be heard. And I love the way that we have articulated that we're each in a very different space. And whatever space we're in, that's where we need to be. So thank you for your bravery and your courage. So we opened up our discussion this evening with some words, and the words were amazing, dynamic, impactful, and intentional actions. And we said those words before we even started speaking them. And I think that speaks volumes to who we are, the spaces we're in, and the spirits that we have. Our panelists this evening have demonstrated the importance of advocating for ourselves, for advocating for our family, our friends, and our community. And when I say our community, I mean the global community, right? Because we're all in this space at this moment, at this time. Lived experiences are powerful. And most importantly, healthcare is an active partnership. And when I heard that statement, I was like, I need to jot that down because I need to remind myself that my health care is an active partnership. So with that being said, the Greater Pearland Area chapter of the Links is participating in the Links National Day of Service with a $1,500 donation. I needed to say that, of course, while I'm giving all this information, because we're honored to partner with you all and on this journey. December 1st, of course, is World AIDS Day globally, and there are a multitude of ways that we can participate. Number one, the easiest and the most simplest way is simply wearing a red ribbon for World AIDS Day. The theme this year is equalize, and that's what we need to do. We need to equalize. So let's get to the thank yous. First, I want to thank the panelists for your authentic selves, your honesty, and your expertise. Number two, I want to thank all the attendees for logging in and embracing the multi-layered discussion that we had this evening. And last but certainly not least, I want to thank my Link sisters for supporting the Greater Pearland Area Chapter Health and Human Services facet and the work that we are doing in this space. And in closing, I must say, we're all going to go forth with this. Let's go forth and remember Dr. Richards' words. Y'all know what they are. Let's get to the kitty gritty and protect ourselves. I'm bringing that up in my class. I'm sorry. We're going to have a kitty gritty conversation and look at some scholarship because that's what we have to do, right? We got to do it. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Dr. Derrick and your facet members. Thank you, Nettie Jones. Thank you, Vanita Ray. Thank you, Marlene McNeese, Erica Lewis, Dr. Wilkins, Dr. Bill, and certainly last but not least, Dr. Campbell, thank you for your walk and for what you're doing for everyone that you come in contact with. Dr. Derrick, I'm turning it back over to you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a fantastic evening. Spread the word. This video will be uploaded on the Facebook website, AIDS Foundation Houston. You will all be able to find this video posted on December 1st, World AIDS Day, on our Facebook page, Greater Pearland Area Chapter of the Links Incorporated. So if your friends missed it tonight, if your family, if someone in your community missed it and you were blown away, because I know this conversation was riveting, this is not the last time that they can view it. So please spread the word. Good evening, everyone.